Welcome to the Healthy Christian Leader podcast. In today's episode, Pastor Danny Smith reflects on the first 15 years of his pastoral ministry, sharing about the dangers of doing ministry while neglecting the care of your soul. He puts it soberly as he says, ministry can be a soul-destroying endeavor. He offers 4 essential disciplines we need to incorporate into our lives that will help us run the race well. He encourages us to spend time with God daily, to rest from our responsibilities weekly, to exercise consistently, and to pour into life-giving relationships with others, beginning with our family. This is a much-needed talk for many Christian leaders. We hope it helps you reflect on your own life and any changes that need to happen for your own health. So with that being said, let's jump into today's talk.
Well, greetings in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ to all of you that are at the well this morning. My name is Danny Smith, and I'm the lead pastor at Middleton Baptist Church in the beautiful Annapolis Valley. I pray that God has blessed you so far this morning as you've had the opportunity to meet and to share with other Christian leaders in your region. And I also pray that you walk away this morning encouraged and equipped to pursue even more passionately and joyfully God's call in your life. That's what the well is all about, and I know personally that I'm so thankful for God's ministry to me month after month through the well. I want to start off this morning by telling you about my most difficult parishioner. In fact, my most difficult parishioner by far, both past and present. This guy is a real piece of work, you'll see. I've served at Middleton Baptist for the last 15 years. 12 years in my current role, and then 3 years prior to that as an assistant pastor. And you need to know that for the most part, folks at Middleton Baptist Church are truly an amazing bunch of people. But then there's this guy. Oh my. First of all, he's absolutely my worst critic. For those of you who are preachers, you know that there are some Sundays you just hit the sermon right out of the ballpark. Sundays where the Word of God has been faithfully handled and delivered to your congregation in such a way that there's a holy buzz among the people after the service as they respond because God, through that sermon, has stirred up people's hearts. And people are coming to you and they're thanking you for the sermon and sharing how it touched their life and so on. Everyone, that is, but this guy. Doesn't matter how faithfully I preach or how engaging the sermon, this guy always meets me at the door with a word of criticism to offer on how the sermon could have been better. And it's not just my preaching he criticizes. With most of the ministry tasks I undertake, he's always coming to me saying, you should have done this, or you should have done that, or why did you waste your time there, or why haven't you visited so-and-so? To be quite honest, some weeks it becomes all a bit much. And it's not like the guy really has a lot to criticize anyway. I happen to know a little bit about his own walk with the Lord and the way he conducts his own life. And although I wouldn't use the word to his face, I think that he's a bit of a hypocrite sometimes. Now, I know in church we lob that accusation around quite a bit like a loaded hand grenade, but the word really means a play actor. Someone who pretends to be someone they're not. And I think sometimes that fits this guy quite well. I mean, believe it or not, this guy actually serves as a leader in our church. I know. We really should be much more careful about who we put in places of authority, but sometimes you get desperate, right? But this guy, well, I just don't know what to do with him sometimes. I know for a fact that there have been weeks, sometimes a number of weeks strung together, when the guy hardly even cracks open the cover of his Bible or does more than mutter a few words of prayer on his way out the door in the morning. And then, when I talk to him about it, how sometimes it appears that he isn't really all that serious about his faith, he gets a little defensive and snappy and tries to tell me about how busy he is serving God and all the good things he's doing and so on. And then he hauls out his calendar and shows me all the hard work for the Lord that he's been doing lately. So who am I to question his relationship with God? I mean, the guy does keep a pretty busy schedule, I have to admit. But I do wish someone like that giving leadership in the church would pay a little more attention to his own soul in the midst of trying to care for the soul of others. There's something else about this guy that's come to my attention as well. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to know this about him, but sometimes when he's had one of those really bad weeks, when he's scheduled his life too full, when the demands have piled up beyond the breaking point, I've heard he can get a little snappy with his wife and kids. I know how it feels when he comes at me with criticism, but I've also heard that when life seems to be overwhelming for him, he can take that out on his family by becoming quite critical of them as well. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I'm not being very Christ-like right now, airing all this guy's dirty laundry at the well. So I apologize if you think that my tongue might be getting the better of me this morning by gossiping about this guy. But sometimes he just has me at my wit's end. And I just really need to talk about him to someone and get some things off my chest. And unfortunately for you, I guess, you're the ones getting dumped on, and I'm sorry. But I guess I trust that you, as fellow Christian leaders working in the trenches alongside of me, might understand a little bit about what I'm going through with him, and that you would be discreet enough not to allow what I'm saying about this guy get back to my church. I mean, I'd hate for him to hear what I've said about him. Because after all, you know, I still have a bit of a soft spot for the guy. And I really don't want to hurt him. I've tried confronting him, you know, with all of this stuff. But he doesn't really take spiritual direction very well either. I mean, he has his good moments. There are times that we talk and sometimes he gets it. And for a time I'll give the guy some credit. There's a marked improvement. And I think to myself, finally, God, maybe the heavy burden of this guy on my back will be lifted. Maybe this time things will be different. But then, slowly but surely, I see it start to happen. Something bad happens at work and sets the guy off. The demands start to pile up on him and he begins to crack under the weight. His time with the Lord slowly but steadily starts to decline, and before I know it, that old troublemaker is back causing more grief and problems than I can barely stand. Well, there's more I could say about this guy, much more in fact. You don't even know the half, but hopefully you're starting to get the picture of the kind of guy that this is. I mean, some weeks he's a real burden and a drag. There are some weeks that Friday, my day off, just can't get here quickly enough. So I can run home, lock the door, turn my cell phone off, and begin to unwind knowing that I've got just at least one day when I don't have to deal with this guy. But you know what the absolute worst, most unsettling thing about this guy is? I mean, this tops everything else that he's done. He just won't leave me alone. Even on Fridays. You might think I sound a bit crazy saying this, but I think the guy's got keys to my house. I mean, Friday morning I get up, have a nice relaxing shower, go over to the mirror, wipe the steam off, and you wouldn't believe it. There's this guy standing there in my bathroom, staring at me from my mirror. You see, the most unsettling thing about this guy is that he's me. Yes, that's right. By far, I have found that the most difficult parishioner I have in my church to shepherd and lead and guide in the ways of Jesus is me, hands down. I can remember entering ministry, fresh out of seminary, thinking that the most difficult and trying ministry tasks were going to be dealing with the cantankerous and discontented in my congregation, when noses got bent out of shape and underwear got knotted up, or leading the church through seasons of change in order to be more effective, or finding the time to have the discipline every week to search God's Word and communicate it effectively so that my congregation is adequately nourished by the Word, or being able to offer appropriate comfort and counsel in a time of crisis. And there's no question about it that that some of these things are difficult and require great wisdom and patience and diligence. But to my surprise and discomfort, I have come to discover that the most difficult ministry task is none of these things, but instead it is the task of shepherding my own soul. The governance of self, I would argue, is the chief challenge of ministry. Everything else that we do or that we are flows out of the river of our soul, and if that river is low or it's run dry, we're in deep, deep trouble. I can't be the disciple, husband, father, leader, mentor, student, friend, son, brother, and so on that God has called me to be unless there is water flowing in the river of my soul. As I reflect back on 15 years of pastoral ministry, to my shame, I see far too many seasons of ministry when I have been trying to draw cool water to give to others from a river or from a well that was running dangerously low. And this has led me to a time of reflection in my own life on how the next 15 years are going to be different from the first 15. Because I really do want there to be a next 15. One of the top reasons I think Christian leaders end up dropping out of the race before the finish line is that somehow we think that we can tend to the well-being of everyone else's soul without tending to our own. And there comes a day when we take our cup and we dip it down into the well of our soul to draw a cup of water to offer to someone else in Jesus' name, and we realize, to our dismay, that the well is run dry. We've got nothing else to give. And as I think about how over the next 15 years, I'm going to try and ensure that there is water in the well of my soul to draw from, I find Paul's sobering but insightful words in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 24 to 27, very helpful, and I want to share them with you this morning. Paul writes this. He says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize." Paul uses the athletic imagery of running a race and competing in a boxing match as metaphors for the Christian life. And there are a number of important things that he has to say to us here in these verses. First, I want us to note who Paul tells us is our primary opponent in the race we're running, and this boxing match that we're fighting in. It may surprise us. Think about your own ministry, your own life, and the various obstacles, people or otherwise, that lay in our path on any given day, week, month, or year. Who or what is keeping you from running the race well, to fighting the good fight? Who or what is the primary opponent that you face? Paul tells us this morning here in this passage that our primary opponent isn't some cantankerous old biddy in the back pew, and that it isn't some troublesome board member, and it isn't that guy out in the community who will, for whatever reason, is doing everything he can to try and discredit your ministry. And it isn't that staff member that you just don't click with, or anyone else for that matter. Paul recognizes that the primary opponent he is in competition with is himself. He says, "I strike a blow to my body and make it a slave." Paul is boxing with himself. And there's a reason why Paul recognizes that he is his own most fearsome opponent. Paul recognizes something about the nature of ministry that I ignore, that we ignore to our own peril. He says in verse 27, "I strike a blow to my body and make it a slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. Paul recognizes that ministry, yes, ministry, can be a soul-destroying endeavor. And Paul is saying here that he must constantly wrestle with himself, making sure that his own life is kept on course and in submission to God, lest he come to the end of a lifetime where he has literally spent himself in the cause of ministry and find that he's all lost his own soul in the process. I can't imagine. I don't want to imagine what it would be like. But it's a very real possibility that Paul warns us of here. In fact, I know, and I'm sure that you do too, pastors and Christian leaders who in the course of ministry have lost their own soul in the process. And it's a horrible thing to witness. And it's a very scary thing when you feel your own soul beginning to drift in that direction. So what do? How do we keep our life on course, and how do we box it into submission so that our well doesn't end up going dry and we have nothing meaningful to offer to others? How do we ensure that we don't arrive at the finish line of life and ministry only to discover that we've lost our own soul in the process? Paul gives us two helpful suggestions here in this passage. First, he says that we need to approach what we do with a seriousness befitting our calling. Ministry can be fun. I hope that you're having fun in ministry. I find it fun most days. But it's also serious business. We are entrusted with the care of souls, our own and then those that God has called us to shepherd. And that's serious stuff. And Paul says we need to approach ministry with a sense of the gravity of the task before us, and therefore to prepare and train ourselves in accordance with the seriousness of our call. He says, starting in verse 24, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever." Paul is suggesting here that the same discipline that a runner might use to prepare their body and mind for a race that they will compete in is the way that we need to approach life as a follower of Jesus and as a Christian leader. So for me, as I've thought about the next 15 years, the question has become, what is absolutely necessary in my life that I need to run the race well? Any athlete running in a race needs to ask themselves this question. If I want to run the race well, what disciplines do I absolutely have to incorporate into my life to help me prepare to run the race? For the runner, it might include things like training, running regularly, and exercising. It might mean ensuring that their diet is well monitored. It might mean periods of rest to allow their body to recover and so on. But any serious runner getting ready for a race will have certain practices that they incorporate into their lives so that on race day, they're ready to run. And as I think back over the past 15 years, what I realize is that there have been far too many times when I've just shown up to run. I've been disciplined my heart, soul, mind, and body beforehand. I've just shown up, expecting somehow to naturally be able to run the race in my own strength. And while I can usually get started off at a good pace, I can tell you that the race rarely ends well. I'm exhausted, tired, cranky, and no good for no one, including myself. I have not prepared myself for the race, but I have not prepared myself before the race or paced myself during it. I just showed up, expecting to be able to run. But it doesn't work that way. And so, as I've thought about the next 15 years ahead, I've asked myself, what is absolutely necessary that I need in my life in order to run the race well? that if they are missing, I'm in big trouble. And here they are. Number one, meaningful time with the Lord daily in His Word and in prayer and in study. Number two, regular time each week to step out of the fray and rest. In other words, the weekly practice of Sabbath. Number three, time each day to exercise and care for this temple of the Holy Spirit that God has entrusted to me. And number four, and finally, life-giving relationships with others, beginning with my wife and children. Now, I know that that's a fairly obvious list, that if you were composing it, I'm sure that you would come up with many of the same things. They are so obviously things that we need in our lives, and yet they are so frustratingly difficult to maintain over the long haul, because they are the things in life that are the easiest to put off until tomorrow when life starts getting out of hand. And then before we know it, if we're not careful, we find ourselves running a race that we aren't close to being prepared to run. So how do I move from knowing what I need to do to actually doing what I need to do? How do I keep these four priorities a priority? Paul helps us out here as well as we come to the second thing that Paul instructs us to do, so that in ministry we don't end up losing our own soul in the process. He tells us we need to keep our eye on the goal and do the things at the cost of everything else that advance us towards that goal. Keep in mind what the goal is. The goal here for Paul is that in the course of ministry he has not so neglected his own soul that he ends up disqualified from the race at the end. Instead, he wants to be found faithfully shepherding his own soul as well as those under his care. So this is what he says in verse 26. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. Maybe you've discovered this about ministry. There's always something to do. I mean, rarely have I met a bored pastor or Christian leader. I've met lots of busy ones, but I can't say as I've ever met one who said to me, you know, Danny, I've got absolutely nothing to do today. Everything is caught up at the church. My sermon is finished. No one is sick in the hospital or at home. No one has died recently. No one needs to see me about everything. I have no meetings that I need to be at. All my long-term planning is done. I have all the volunteers I need to fill all the ministries. I've read all the books in my libraries. There are no emails in my email box. There are no phone calls to return. Everyone in my sphere of influence is a fully mature follower of Jesus Christ, and there is no one that needs to be discipled. It's a completely free day. Well, such a mythical person, I think we can safely place alongside other mythical beings such as the unicorn and the Sasquatch. The reality for most of us is that there is always something to do. I mean, by the time I get to the bottom of my to-do list, there's usually another to-do list waiting there for me. There's always something to do. The question is, what are we going to do? And this is where Paul's words that we not be found running aimlessly or fighting like a boxer beating the air is so crucial. The point for us is not just that we run hard for the sake of running hard, or that we fight hard in the course of ministry for the sake of looking busy and saying that we're doing something. It's that we run hard and we fight hard in order to actually advance us towards the goal. When this is not the case, all we end up doing many times is running around in circles and boxing at the air instead of advancing towards the goal. As I look back, I'm embarrassed to discover that many times that I've completely burned myself out being busy, and all I've been doing is running aimlessly in circles or boxing at the air. I've looked busy, I've been exhausted in the end, but it was not purposeful towards the end that the well of my soul be filled to the brim with the living water of Jesus Christ, so that I might then offer to a thirsty world out of the fullness of the well, instead of trying to rescue a few drops from the bottom of a well that has gone dry. I wonder how many of us as Christian leaders find ourselves more often than we like to admit burning ourselves out just so that we can box at the air and run around in circles instead of truly advancing towards the goal. It's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. How do I keep the main thing the main thing? In the midst of all the various options before me, how do I choose wisely so that I can effectively shepherd the souls entrusted to me and not lose my own soul in the process? How do I keep those four priorities in my life I spoke of earlier a priority? I want to share 3 helpful strategies that I have committed to try and be more intentional about implementing in my life as I move on and press on towards the goal. Again, none of these will be earth-shattering or new to you, but I find sometimes it's just being reminded of these things that we're spurred on to implement them more effectively in our lives. First is to plan to succeed. I credit Dwight Habermale, the president of Aaron Ministries, with teaching me this one. He taught me that it's hard to figure out how to navigate the river when you're in the middle of it fighting with the rapids. Any good kayaker will, on regular intervals, step out of the river, have a look at the rapids and the obstacles up ahead, and plan how they're going to navigate safely through the rapids before they tackle that leg of the river. And that's no less true for our lives. We can't effectively navigate through the rapids of ministry unless we're taking regular times aside to plot and plan our course. I've committed to this being a regular practice in my life because I know from the past that when I plan well, I lead well. And when I don't, that things begin to crumble. So how do I plan well then, when there are just so many things coming at me and so many unexpected things that happen in the course of ministry? Well, second then is what I call the power of no. It's not practicing this that gets me in so much trouble so much of the time. I love new things. I love being challenged and trying out different methods and ideas. And so I've found that one of my biggest problems is that when a new opportunity comes along, I jump on it without fully thinking it through. Or when someone from the church suggests that this is something I really should be involved in, far too often I say, sure, I'd love to be involved, without taking the time to think through the commitment that I'm making. There are a ton of good things out there to be involved in when it comes to ministry. And that's the problem. I love being involved, but being involved inevitably almost every single time ends up taking away from my primary calling to first allow my own soul to be shepherded and shaped by God, so that I might shepherd others through the primarily biblical tasks of the proclamation of the Word, the ministry of prayer, and intentionally being in the lives of people to help lead them towards Christ and equip them for the work of ministry. And so I've committed to say no more often. In fact, to no most of the time. Saying no helps build margin in my life so that there is room for the inevitable unexpected things. I sat down and I looked at how many hours each week it would take just to accomplish what is already required of me without adding anything else. And it was more than I could ever hope to possibly accomplish right now. And so I need to go back again and discern what are the things that will actually, at the end of the day, advance me closer to the goal, and which are the things that are just causing me to run in circles and box in the air. And that leads me to the final commitment I've made, and that is to ask God about everything. I feel quite stupid saying this, but part of the problem in the past is that I just jumped on every opportunity and tried to meet everyone's expectations of me without asking God what He wanted me to do. I mean, when I would ask for someone from the church to volunteer for something, I would always preface it with, please pray about this before you say yes or no. You would think that I would have the good sense to practice that myself, but nope. It was just full steam ahead for me, but no more. I need a go from God. Well, I want to thank you for your time this morning, and I pray that This discussion will be helpful for you, and that you will use this talk as a springboard for some great discussion in your small groups. And so may God bless each one of you as you press on towards the goal in your own ministry.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Healthy Christian Leader podcast. If you enjoyed it, consider leaving us a review. And if you're looking to grow with like-minded Christian leaders, consider engaging with our online community. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, or you can check us out online at aaronministries.com.